paying attention. Well, one thing that I have done in preparation for the introduction of Sora, you already noticed, is that I gained a bit of intel about you. And one thing that I already knew about you is that you are kind of like a double type of coach. And one type of coach that you are is a baseball coach or basketball coach. Is it?
Yes.
And I have actually seen, if you go on his profile, he has some, you have really cool newsletter articles or like posts that are becoming an article on LinkedIn. And some of them you actually talk and make this connection between how leadership in working with a team of girls in basketball
Yeah,
has
roughly
a
14 years old, yeah.
leadership connection. That's really nice because it becomes this link between he's not just talking from a book, but he's talking about personal life and personal experience relatable. That's why I thought I'm gonna bring that ball with me. I thought I don't fit in a suitcase, a huge one, but one like that at least I can get it. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for taking time from between two trainings to be here. I'm just gonna say like this. As far as I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking more towards Daniel. You've been introduced by Daniel as if there's anyone in Germany that's seen as agile like that one, that's you. And if there's anyone that can talk about leadership plus agile, that's you. So, wonderful people, that's what we have on stage. And I stop talking, it's yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for all the pressure. So, ever since this morning, Christina has been challenging me. We haven't met before. So, for the first time, we saw each other today. We've had video calls before. So, this morning, I go upstairs and I find her and I say hi. And she doesn't even say hi. She's like, I thought you were taller. and yeah, and it continues.
So why?
It
So
continues.
Daniel sold you as, like, you know me, he's the same. So I was expecting that I have to look again like this, because we have a coach for our board, and I had done the same mistake. I expected somebody, and then I turn around and I bump into Patrick, but literally bump into him, and then had to go, hi. So,
Yeah, so much for the challenge. Now, let's get started, especially because our Greek friend here took it. I'm Iranian. I'm allowed to do that. We've been fighting for more than 2,500 years, so it just keeps on continuing. All right, so right now is graduation season. And exactly 10 years ago, my mother and I boarded on a plane to go to London because my sister was graduating from London Business School. And the dean of the school gave a speech, and as part of that speech, he shared his passion for teaching, but also he shared a quote. And earlier we heard one of the panel participants refer to Socrates, and that dean also shared a quote from Socrates, which was, I cannot teach you anything, I can only make you think. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that pretty much summarizes how I show up in workshops, or at least how I believe I show up. I know that there are elements that I can teach, but the most important impact that I want to have is helping people expand their perspective, right? Question their assumptions, start to think. And this doesn't mean that people are currently wrong and that hopefully through my input they will be right, but that they actually start that radical self-inquiry, right, within their head, because I think that's the first step towards for all of us to start learning. So everything that I share with you is under that philosophy, right? I cannot teach you anything, I can only make you think. Now, the second thing that I wanted to share with you is about lenses. All of us, the ones that wear glasses and the ones that don't wear glasses, we go through the world with a certain lens. And that lens is based on our past, our experiences, but also the stories that we've heard, right? The things that have been shared within our families. Now, I have a particular set of lenses on. I don't mean these ones. I mean, I'm an immigrant. That's a lens, right? I'm a medical doctor, right? As you mentioned earlier. That's a lens. I became a management consultant. That's another lens. Right? I work in product development. That's another lens. So everything that I share with all of you, again, is based on the lenses that I have. And what I would want what I want to encourage you is for certain elements, as we go through this conversation, try to put on different lenses, right? Try to see the things that I share with you through the lenses that I just described. Doesn't mean that everything that I observe is the right way of observing things. It's the way of observing things through the lenses that I have. And then try to match that with the lenses that you have, right? With the observations that you've had as you go through your life. So, let's start with one last thing before we actually get into the topic. I want this to be interactive. I know in most cases, keynotes are one person standing there telling a bunch of stories or going through a few slides. I don't want that. I have 0 slides. That's the only slide, and that's the one that Christina made. So I will show some sticky notes from time to time, but other than that, I really want it to be interactive. So from time to time, I will also encourage you to share some of your perspectives on that. Now, the first thing that I want to start with is a topic that I refer to as law versus patterns. And I like the fact that in the previous panel that we had, I think it was you but you mentioned the term pattern quite a lot. And I want to explore that in a bit more depth with all of you. So we go back to math, I think it would be 5th or 6th grade, something like that. And I'll show you this. So what is the relationship between A, B, and C? Yeah, so A squared plus B squared equals C squared, right? That's the Pythagoras theorem. Is that true or is it not true? It's true, right? There's more than 100 ways to prove mathematically that this is true. Well, so that's true. Now, if I drop this, or if I let go of my hands, what happens? Falls down. Does it fall down every time? Yeah. We can try again, right? Falls down again. Now, if I do this on the ISS, International Space Station, what happens? It doesn't, right? It floats, so it doesn't fall down. We won't have the same result. So this is context specific, right? Gravity is a law in physics which is context specific. Now, if I go to the ISS and do this, or look at the triangle, is that still true? Yes. That's still true, right? So this one is not context specific. So we have laws that are context specific, and we have laws that are not context specific. Now, we're coming from math to physics, which is a natural science, and whenever we talk about leadership, what is it? It's at best, a social science. Right? And that's coming from someone who spends all his time talking about leadership, teaching leadership, trying to become a better leader themselves. It's at best a social science. And in social sciences, even if sometimes we refer to things as laws, they are not laws. Right? They are at best patterns. They're patterns that might be repeatable within certain contexts, and those contexts need to be very clearly defined, but even in those contexts, it's not 100% guaranteed, right? If I define the context for this one to drop down, it will 100% of the time happen. So this is very predictable, this is repeatable. Whereas when we talk about leadership or social sciences, that's not the case. So moving from that perspective, I want to talk about culture. Because a lot of the conversations we've had here, the earlier panel was about how do we build a coaching culture. What is culture? That's the part where it becomes interactive, by the way. Yes?
The combination of interactions of people within a business.
Okay.
And the forms they choose to communicate and how to do it.
Okay, so you coming from the topic that you earlier covered, right? The communication, absolutely plays a role. And I like the fact that you mentioned like the combination of interactions. Because in many cases, what I hear when I ask this question is people saying, yeah, culture, that's the values that we have in our organization. I'm not saying that's wrong, but what's the problem with that definition? It's abstract. Or put it another way, it's not tangible, right? And if it is abstract or not tangible, it becomes very difficult to shape it. But if it is the combination of interactions, or as Edgar Schein defines it, how we do things around here, or as Tom Peters calls it, the next 5 minutes, then suddenly culture becomes tangible. And with the next 5-minute definition, we also know that each of us gets to make a difference in the next 5 minutes, in how we show up in that meeting, in how we provide feedback, in how we think or rethink our assumptions, right? Challenge them, how we develop hypotheses, right? All of those things suddenly become opportunities to change, shift the culture, even if it's just a bit. Now, what I want to explore with you as part of this talk is how do we actually change or shift the culture? So if you look at the title of the talk, Good Intentions Don't Work, Mechanisms Do, that's a quote from Jeff Bezos. Right? Jeff Bezos, founder, longtime CEO of Amazon, now handed over to Andy Jassy a few years ago. He intentionally shared this quote within the organization over and over and over again. Now, let's break this one down. What are intentions? What are those good intentions that he refers to? Promises? Let's be even more clear. Not wrong, let's be even more clear.
DEI.
DEI could be an intention, right? What else could be an intention? Anyone familiar with the leadership principles at Amazon? Yeah, what's leadership principle number 1? Customer obsession, right? That's a good intention, right? Leaders dive deep. That's leadership principle number 12. That's a good intention, right? Hire and develop the best. I think that's number 6. That's a good intention, right? All of those things are good intentions. Now, why does he say good intentions don't work, mechanisms do, and at the same time, they create this 14, today 16 leadership principles, and if you look at each one of them, it's just, quote unquote, a good intention. Where do we go from here?
Just words.
It's just words. Now, what's the problem with just words, especially if we're not connected to culture?
You don't connect it to behavior.
We've not connected it to behaviors. Now, we could say, hey, as a leader, I'm demanding my people to be customer obsessed. What's keeping them from being customer obsessed?
They don't have the execution.
So they don't know how, how to put it in practice. That could be a competence issue, right? No, you can say, all right, we do a 2-day training, we'll teach people what customer obsession looks like, now we expect them to be customer obsessed. Check.
It will not work because they don't relate it to them. It needs to be a relation with you.
Okay,
There is no
now,
relation.
so that might be about the convincing, right? Let's say we also built in the conviction. You remember earlier we had one panel here where, I think it was David said, one of the quotes that he heard was, it doesn't work to send people that have changed into unchanged systems. David, did I get it right? Are we still here?
Yeah, but I think don't change people to unchanged environments.
So unchanged environments, right? So the thing is that, right, we can send people to training initiatives. I mean, I deliver a lot of those training initiatives. Now, people are like, Scott, this is amazing, you changed my life. I'm like, oh, great. Did I? Well, probably not, because you will walk out of that training and you will end up in that unchanged environment and you will only have good intentions, but you don't have the mechanisms to support them. You might be motivated, you might have the competence, you might have the conviction, but you don't have the mechanisms to support that. And what they do at Amazon and a lot of other companies is they spend a lot of time on those mechanisms that ultimately allow people to demonstrate those different behaviors, which is then a different culture. So talking about customer obsession, what kind of mechanisms can we implement to get there? So measuring Net Promoter Score, that's a metric, right? And usually measuring it is not enough. We also need to make it transparent to everyone. So one of the customers that I worked with was Toyota in Germany. And the first time I move into their office, I have to go to the reception desk, I have to hand the lady working there my ID, she's going to check, like, okay, does he have actually an invitation, etc. While I'm standing there, I take a look left, take a look to the right, and I realize there's a screen similar to this one over there, and on that screen, white background, every 10 to 15 seconds, there's a new feedback coming in, right? On a like 5-star rating, right? And plus some kind of quote from, it seems to be a customer. So I asked the lady, I was like, what is this? And while she's doing her work, she's like, yeah, that's feedback, real-time customer feedback coming. Right? What do you mean real-time? It's 8 a.m. in the morning. So yeah, that's from people that just received a survey based on taking their car to a Toyota workshop or just buying a new Toyota. And I'm like, is this in German? She's like, yeah, that's for the German-speaking market because we're one market. And I continue questioning, I'm like, is this here every day or is today like some kind of, she's like, no, that's here every day. And now, without me asking further questions, she says, the intention of this thing is that everybody walking into this door, into this office, knows for whom they're working and for whom they're solving the problems. And she continues and said, Mr. Salimi, if you then later go to have lunch, in the canteen you will see that there's even more screens with this type of feedback, right? That's a mechanism that allows us or increases the chance of people then demonstrating customer obsession. So when we say good intentions don't work, mechanisms do, I really go into this topic because I'm so curious. How do we shift cultures? Right? I myself come from the hospital system. Right? There's a lot of great things about hospitals, but there's also a lot of things that don't work really well in hospitals. And figuring out what are the mechanisms that we can introduce to get to different behaviors. That could be better communication, right? And your product seems to be one of those mechanisms. It could be even more patient centricity. It could be more empathy. It could be whatever, right? A better relationship between doctors and nurses. All of those mechanisms, that's where my curiosity comes from. Now, I want to use this talk also as a situation or an opportunity where we go through a few examples together and obviously also talk about AI. But before we get there, let's first talk about health. Right? I'm a medical doctor, more or less by definition, every time I get to meet people, health is a topic, although I'm not practicing anymore, that's really close to my heart. Now, if we want to be healthy, what kind of intentions could we have? What would be good intentions for a long and healthy life? So eat well, right?
Only one.
Sleep well. Exercise. Mental health, right? Those are usually the 4 things that I also list with people. All of them good intentions, mechanisms. Let's start with eat well. Let's go through mechanisms. McDonald's, excellent mechanism. Fast food. Right? If you put a nut in front of it, like nut fast food, there would be some kind of mechanism. Well, but give me concrete mechanisms. Yeah, could be, right? That's already some kind of mechanism, right? It raises the awareness. It's more educational, right? What could I do? But let's go into mechanisms, more concrete mechanisms.
For example, I've researched what healthy options I have with local delivery food providers. So when I'm hungry and I don't want to cook, I do not have to think or anything. I just pick a healthy option, like automatically that I have researched before.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. So one of my workshop participants, I realized immediately when he showed up, he was like super fit. I go, what do you do? He's like, yeah, I do this, and I'm a CrossFit world champion. I was like, whoa, okay, that's how you look like. And then we talked about like diet. And I realized, so during our workshops, we then take people for lunch, etc. He never ate at the restaurant. He brought his own food. That was his mechanism. Because he didn't know when he's not at home and when he's not at his workplace, what kind of options there are. He always brings his own food, where he makes sure he has enough proteins, he has the right type of carbs, and so on and so forth. The 5 a day that you mentioned, right? That's his mechanism. Bring your own food, right? Other mechanisms that we could have around food is like having an 8-16 diet, right? Whatever you want, right? But those are clear mechanisms. Let's go to sleep. Aura ring, right? Or Whoop band, right? Both of them help us get more awareness, and to some extent they also coach us. Getting back to what the type of product that you're building. What else can we do? Yes, sleep hygiene, right? Those of you who have kids or had kids at some point, they were small, right? You're like, oh, sleep hygiene and repeatability and habits, that's everything, right? The moment we break it by just 10, 15, 20 minutes, it becomes a nightmare. The same applies to us. Having a clear routine. So for my wife and I, it's like the kids have to go to bed at 8. If they sleep or not, it's their decision. But that's when we close the door to their rooms, and then we take a walk. Right? That's how we wind down. No more screens, right? A glass of water, no more tea or coffee, right? And then you go to sleep, right? That's the kind of repeatable habit that you develop. That's a mechanism which then, in most cases, results in good sleep. So now moving from all of that to one more topic. Because we talked about good intentions, we talked about mechanisms, there's one more thing missing.
Discipline. The discipline.
Discipline. Bingo. 100% bingo. So I think nobody used your bingo. Can you defer a book?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so you just want a book.
Yes.
Hey! No, really, discipline, right? Discipline is incredibly important. Within an organization, we can have all of those mechanisms in place, but if people are not disciplined, and discipline is a personal choice to some extent, right? Then none of this will happen. Now this brings me to coaching. We earlier, or throughout these 2-3 days, how long has this conference been going? 2 days? Yeah. Only 2 days. Oh, so I just missed out 1 day. I arrived today, right? There is a certain definition of coaching in your context, but that's not the only definition. You earlier mentioned that I also work as a basketball coach, right? As a basketball coach, you don't follow the ICF's coaching definition. There is another coaching definition in the sports world, right? So let's not argue about which definition of coaching is the right one, right? Because I think to the outside world, that's not going to be helpful. But when I think, based on the work that I get to do with my clients, right? Companies like MAN, which is part of the Volkswagen Group, companies like Roche, as a medical doctor, being in the agile space, it helps to work with pharmaceutical companies, right? The work that I do with Aldi, right? Stella was earlier talking about Aldi. I know that as a coach, someone that comes from the outside, that is not a traditional management consultant that delivers 100 PowerPoint slides and then leaves and doesn't care about the results, right? I support them with all three of these things. I help them define what are the right intentions based on the strategy, based on the goals that we want to achieve. I help them identify what are potential mechanisms that we can introduce in order to get there. And the identification of those mechanisms includes both asking good questions so that they can come up and be creative, but also sharing good practices. All of my clients ask for best practices. I say there are no best practices. There's always something that we can do better, but we can share good practices. We can share patterns from other companies that can help you. Those are the mechanisms. And the third thing that I do is I help them with discipline.
How?
Now, as a coach, exactly, how do we help with discipline? Monitoring. What else? Accountability. Now let's explore this a bit more. What do you mean by accountability, and how do we do that?
Set up a schedule.
Set up a schedule, right? So who of you is familiar with Marshall Goldsmith? Hopefully a lot, right? Now, Marshall, I met him at, was it Drucker Forum 2018, something like that, many years ago. And I asked him, Marshall, what's your number one coaching advice? And he says the number one thing that he does with every single one of his clients is he calls them in the evening and just asks, how are you progressing? That's it. That's the one call that he makes. And what does that do? People knowing that he will call, right? and they don't want to be embarrassed. Remember, the people that he talks to, the people that he coaches, are CEOs that want to be achievers. And there's nothing worse to an achiever than your coach calling you and you saying, I didn't do that. I forgot about that. Right? That's not who you are. So knowing that this call will come just holds them accountable throughout the day. And this is one of the things that I believe we as coaches can do. It's not like, because we don't have any hierarchical power. We can't go and say, you haven't done this, you're fired. That's not how it works, right? I mean, we could fire them as our clients, but then we also lose our ability to have impact on them, right? But supporting them through holding them accountable, that's one thing we can do. So one of my biggest clients today is Aldi, actually the company that Stella works with. And with every single one of those 4 board members, I have at least once a month a jour fixe. At least once a month. We don't know what will the agenda of that conversation, but what they do know is I will always come with follow-up. Because every conversation ends with a concrete to-do. And that to-do is not on my side. That to-do is on their side. And then I'll ask them. And yes, sometimes it happens that we had other things to do, right? Bigger fish to fry, something else came up. But I know every time they say something else came up, you can see it in their eyes. They don't feel good about this. Right? So they really try to implement those things, not because I have some kind of hierarchical power over them, but because they also don't want to, that's at least my perception, let me down as their coach. And I remember when I used to go to the gym and had a personal trainer, every time I showed up, he said, go hard or go home. Now, what do you respond to that? Yeah, I mean, if you're an achiever, you will never say, all right, I go home. No? You say, no, I'm here, I showed up, I'm going to go hard. And of course, you can't always go as hard as you did before. Right? Sometimes you are tired, etc. But you do your best. And a coach can be really someone that holds someone else accountable, so also fostering the discipline in the intentions and the mechanisms and the discipline. So that trilogy of things is really important. Now let's talk about AI. This conference, to my understanding, right, there's been a lot of conversation around AI. If we think about AI within organizations, through that coaching lens, what could be our intentions? I'm going to tell it to you. What could be our intentions? A bit louder, please. So increasing productivity. Yeah? Increasing productivity could be one intention. What else?
Saving costs.
Saving costs.
Saving costs, absolutely. Could be one of the intentions. What else?
Speed up the results.
Speeding up results, absolutely. Could be one of the intentions. Now, I love the fact that you brought up these things, right? Increasing productivity, reducing costs, increasing or shortening time to market, for example, increasing revenues could also be something. Right? So it's not only about driving down costs, but also identifying new opportunities where we as an organization can make profits. This is why I was so curious earlier when we had the panel conversation around the coaching culture, but how do we measure success? Because the people that I get to work with, right, it's great if they believe in something and they do it. There's actually this Steve Jobs quote, which I love, who says, some things need to be believed until they're seen. And normally, especially in Germany, it's the other way around. We say, as long as I don't see it, I won't believe it, right? Which is, from a scientific perspective, it is correct. Because you first need to observe certain things, and then you say, all right, there is a pattern, maybe even a law behind it. But some things need to be believed until they're seen. Now, you can't always go with that belief. I will come back to belief later. It is incredibly important. But sometimes we also need to move into demonstrating results. And shortening time to market is a concrete result. Right? Increasing revenue or reducing costs, including increasing productivity, that's a clear business result. That's something where every CFO will look at it and say, that makes sense. We want more of this. So about 9-10 years ago, I got to work for the first time with a hardware company. I mean, due to my medical background, after that I left the management consulting, then I did a lot of software. And in the agile space, initially it was all about software development. Now, some companies approached us and said, we want to build hardware using agile principles. Can we do that? That's the part where I initially said, some things need to be believed until they're seen. So we start working with MAN, and they do this because they knew the traditional way of building products would not get them the results that they were looking for. They had 18 months till the next exhibition. They desperately wanted to demonstrate their very first electric vehicle at that exhibition. And their normal development times were 5 years. So if you know you normally need 5 years, the exhibition is 18 months in the future, you know you have a problem, right? This is where, with the back against the wall, you're willing to try something else. So we get in, we work with the team, small team, 10 people, we deliver within 18 months. Or that team delivers within 18 months with our support, right? This is the moment where there was first belief, and then it's seen. Based on that result, you manage to get more budget from the CFO because that person said, from 5 years to 18 months, I now want this with every single project, right? What have we been doing wrong in the past that we always needed 5 years? How can we get every project to be so fast? And if you manage to demonstrate your results as a coach, not only in client satisfaction, that's one level, right? And it's a very important one. It's the first one because it's so easy to measure. It's a really good leading indicator. But ultimately, you need to have other, more business-related KPIs that also convince CFOs. And shortening time to markets is one of those indicators. Increasing team productivity, not only team happiness, is an indicator. Reducing or increasing retention in an organization, especially of top talent, is one of those indicators. So whatever metric works for you, try to use it in order to be convincing. Now, when you do that, again, going to AI, what kind of mechanisms can we implement? We have the intentions. What kind of mechanisms can we implement? With the intentions that we have around AI, right? We said increasing productivity, more revenue, reduction in cost, shortening time to markets. Those were the intentions. What kind of mechanisms can we implement?
KPI dashboard.
A KPI dashboard. Okay. Now, what would we measure? All of those. So make them transparent. And this sounds so simple. But in many organizations where at least I get into, and I might be the lucky one or unlucky one, you realize that they're not measuring anything. Although they're like highly sophisticated organizations that are reporting every 3 months because they're publicly listed, but all of those things that we just talked about, right? Team productivity, time to market, they're not measuring. They don't have any baselines. Setting the baseline, making them transparent to everyone is one mechanism. What else can we do?
But KPIs are useless if you don't do anything about them.
Yeah, so actions, right? Now, there's this Peter Drucker quote, you can't change things that you can't measure, so starting to measure things is a great start, but it's a start. And now comes the actions. Let's be more clear on the actions. With regards to AI.
First of all, I would give access to AI for all employees.
Yeah.
Allow them to train and play around with the AI.
Absolutely.
Then I would start to share success stories where they see what they can do with AI and inspire others.
Yeah. No, you and I had this conversation earlier today, right? No, does it have to be everyone? I'm definitely in that camp. But similar to MAN, you could say, hey, let's just take one group of people, right? The ones that maybe even volunteer for this, give them access to, for example, ChatGPT. Also, give them a clear mandate that by the end of, let's say, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, we want to see concrete cases on how they have applied AI without other directions and what kind of results they've achieved, right? Build those internal case studies, could be a very clear mechanism, and it's not even that costly. It's like 25 euros a month per person, multiplied it by 3 months, 75, by 100 people, 7,500 euros. That's peanuts for most organizations. What else? Daniel.
An additional practice that seems to be emerging in a lot of companies is then to appoint those people as kind of AI ambassadors
Yes.
that share the things that are already working with other people, have other projects, implement AI, share the, hey, we figured already out, these are the use cases for us, you can apply it here as well. Like have these people internally who are like the multipliers for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this leads me to one concrete example. I always jokingly say there's one client, I refer to them as my oldest client. Not because I've been working with them for so long, but because they are a 405-year-old company. Probably one of the oldest companies in Germany. It's a publishing company from Cologne called Dumont. They own multiple newspapers, also a bunch of other things. And they are today a holding with, I think last time I counted, 16 or 17 companies part of that holding. In order to make every single company in that holding, right? They're not a corporation, they're a holding. So every single company is independent. But in order to make every single one of those companies an AI company, and that's a huge intention. It's not just about increasing productivity or reducing time to market. Right? Every single company should become an AI company. We can debate what that means and whether that's right. They created an AI circle that goes across companies. That was their first intention. Well, it was first mechanism, sorry. Then they took every single member of that AI circle for a week-long trip to New York, where they explored some of the best AI companies and what they're doing. And each of those companies within the Dumont holding comes from very different areas. Marketing technologies, as I mentioned earlier, media, business solutions, etc. And now this AI circle is constantly running experiments within each of those companies, and they're mirroring this back to each other. So they're learning from each other. It's, in this case, really a significant investment, but being a 405-year-old company, they know that from time to time, when these huge technology shifts show up, you also have to make some bigger bets. Right? And they'd rather be the disruptor than the ones that are being disrupted. Now, in order to close this, I mentioned earlier that I will come back to belief. Earlier today, during one of the lunch breaks, during the lunch break, there weren't multiple, we had a conversation, a discussion, a debate around the topic of agency. And maybe based on my background, again, looking through my lenses, I believe people have a lot of agency if they do believe. Actually, belief for me is hope plus agency. And I want to share two stories, and then I'll close for today. The first story is from an agile coach within Aldi. And Stella, are you still here somewhere? Yeah? Yeah, you remember Jean-Pierre? Jean-Pierre Wolf?
Yes.
So Jean-Pierre Wolf, he was in no managerial position. And Aldi is a very hierarchical company. Or was a very hierarchical company. They're changing. Definitely they are. And Jean-Pierre came to one of our sessions around agile leadership. It was a 2-hour session, mostly around awareness. And after that, we got into conversation. He said, Sarah, we really need to get you into Aldi. I'm like, more than happy to do that. Would love to work with a company that is literally next door to me. So this was in November of 2019. In March of 2020, we all know what happened. So he emails me, he's like, no, we have other things to do. We have to postpone the workshop. I get it. And then we scheduled it for December of 2020. So a year and 3 months later, or 2 months later, than we first met. Now, Jean-Pierre calls me a week before that course and says, we have to talk. I first thought, he's like, we have to postpone it again. Fortunately, that was not the case. He said, I want to walk you through the list of participants. I'm like, okay, why would you do that? I really don't care. He's like, no, you care, trust me. So he walks me through the list of participants, and he starts out with the back then CEO, then basically his right hand, then the head of HR, then Stella as the person who is in charge of the leadership advisors. I'm like, what did this guy pull off, right? It was not the first time that I had CEOs in my course, but it was the first time that it was the first course for a company. Because usually the senior leadership team, they send everybody else right? 2-day course, and then they say, oh, can we get a half-day version for that? Because I, as the CEO, I'm so busy, I don't have any time, right? That's what usually happens. Not in this case. It demonstrated, on the one hand side, right, how much commitment the CEO had towards good leadership. And when I worked later with Aldi in more capacity, I realized that this organization really values great leadership and does a lot, right? The mechanisms they have in place are amazing to get to great leadership. But it also showed me how convincing this one agile coach was. With no hierarchical leadership role, he convinced his boss, that boss's boss, that boss's boss's boss, and then ultimately the CEO. So 4 layers up, he managed to influence people to show up to that training. And not only show up, block those 2 days, be there, fully present, participate, and the rest is then history, how this thing became a transformation within Aldi South, right? Or within Aldi DX. Now, another story that I want to share shows even more how much a long-term perspective makes a difference. Because sometimes when we look at our own context, we're like, there's not really much that I can do, right? Or there's only very little that I can do. And both of my grandfathers, so I'm originally from Iran, I mentioned this a bit earlier, both of them didn't go to school when they were kids. Back then, there was no mandatory school. So when their kids, which is my mom and my dad, went to school, they both made a choice. They said, I want to be in the position to help my child at school. Which is when they also went then to evening school, right? So when my dad went to year 1, his dad went also to year 1, right? That's incredible if you think about it. And my grandfather, also on the mother's side, they didn't do this with the intention of going to university at some point. They actually, they just finished year 6, which was good enough in that case, but they did that with the intention of showing their kids how much they value learning, education. Both of their kids, my mom and my dad, became the first ones in their family to go to university. They managed to get into the most prestigious university in Iran, the Polytechnique. Right? My mom was only one of 4 women that ended up in an engineering degree. Now, they initiated a revolution in Iran in 79. In 83, 84, they leave because of political reasons. But based on their education, they also managed to build a different life in Germany, integrate really well into society, and then create something for my sister and myself. Right? Although we were immigrants, having that parents, having that history from my grandparents, we looked at education in a completely different way. And we made use of the public system that exists here, right? That's a mechanism that's there to give everyone, even someone like me, a fair chance for succeeding. And sometimes you really need to have that long-term perspective. Even if you're not seeing immediate changes for yourself, right? That's my grandparents. You can sometimes think, I initiate a change today, right? With how I show up in the next 5 minutes to make an impact for generations to come. And that's what I want to close with. Thank you so much.